All right, folks, we'll go ahead and get started. Jamie, if you're ready. Once again, this is Heather Krumpak with GradLeaders. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a very special guest, Miss Jamie Belinne, who you see there, waiting patiently with the friend's background. Jamie's a longtime friend and partner of mine, as well as GradLeaders. So we're thrilled that she was able to provide her expertise today via this webinar. Jamie is the Assistant Dean at the C.T. Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. Amongst many other things, she's also an author of several books, and most recently, her book titled The Care and Feeding of Your Young Employee. So with that being said, Jamie, I'll let you take it away, and we thank you for being here.
Heather, hello everyone. It's always kind of odd for me when I'm talking to little squares on the screen, but I know some of the names, and so it's good to see you. I guess we can call it see you. So a little bit, Heather told you about me. I've worked at LSU, at Tulane, at University of Texas. Now I've been at University of Houston for about 15 years. And while I was there, I got a real interest in why are these kids so different from the other ones that I've worked with in the past? And are they really different? And is it all in my head? And so I started doing a whole lot of surveying. And over the space of about 10 years, I surveyed about 13,000 young people of all ages to kind of get a sense of perceptions and preferences and where they were going, and did notice some trends. So I'm going to share a little bit today, not only about these trends, but also how it got to where it is, why it matters, and then what are we going to do with all of that. So to take you into my world, right now, many of you have heard about the workforce is this whole big group of millennials, and they're taking over the workforce. And by the way, you'll see in my presentation, I don't use the word millennial. There's a lot of baggage around the term millennial. People tend to use it to describe any young person that's getting on their nerves. And so we call that age bracket Gen Y because there's not as much baggage with that. And we'll be talking about Gen Z and all the noise about millennials are taking over the workforce. They're this huge chunk, which is true. What people aren't talking about is Gen Z is going to be about a quarter of the workforce very soon. And we're not really talking about how they are not millennials. They're very, very different people. So if you're wondering who's who, I'm not one of those people that believes in like cutoff dates, because people will say, well, what's the cutoff for being a millennial? I'm like, well, it's not like on January 1st, 1996, everything changed. And now every baby born as of 1201 was completely different from the one born at 1159. It doesn't really work that way. There are kind of groupings where major events going on in the world affected the groups that came up during that time. So our matures, sometimes called the greatest generation, I think they came up with that name, but that's okay. The matures are kind of born mid-20s through mid-40s. The boomers, of course, born after World War II, mid-40s through mid-60s. And then Gen X is kind of mid-60s to late 70s. It's a slightly smaller wedge of time. And then Gen Y, aka millennials, kind of late 70s through late 90s. And then Gen Z, that's when we started to actually have the term millennium, are the people that were born late 90s to we're not sure yet. And folks will tell you, oh, there's Gen this and Gen that, and they're the next ones, and here's what they're like. I caution you to take any advice on the youngest people out there, the ones that are like in elementary and middle school. Because you think about it, would you want somebody to have described your adult self based on who you were in 3rd grade? I mean, I think that's really taking it out there. But the Gen Z folks, we got a pretty good idea of where they are now. Now, before I go any further with who they are and where they are, there's something that's very important that you know, which is those individual differences will trump generational differences every day of the week. There are trends, but we're individuals. The life experiences you've had personally, the family you grew up in, the culture you have, the history you have, so many things have an impact on who you are as a person. Generation is just one of those things. Now, with that said, based on all the research that's out there, we have found there are some trends that we can look at. But again, don't define somebody. This is descriptive. It's not diagnostic. So, for instance, I looked at the people that were coming in, and from the few pictures that I could see, I don't think there was anybody in there that actually remembered the moon landing and watching it. But when I'm in a larger group with a lot of people that are from the early boomer generation, I always have a few people in the audience that saw it. I always like, tell me about that experience. What was it like to watch the moon landing? And you'll hear pretty much the same story. My whole family gathered together. The neighbors may have come over. We all sat around the TV that we had, because there was one, it was black and white. The same show was on every single station at all three TV stations were carrying the moon landing. We all watched it together, and it's all anybody was talking about anywhere on the world. And there was this wonderful message that we had from the moon landing, which was, man has conquered space. Go man! Very empowering. By the way, I do have to tell you, I do a lot of work at NASA, and I did this presentation there. I'm like, who remembers where you were at the moon landing? And this one guy raised his hand. I'm like, tell me about it. He said, well, I was sitting in mission control, and I'm like, okay, you're out of my league, but I need to hear that whole story later. So we had this experience for the boomers of, wow, man has conquered space. Now, when Gen X came along, they had their own moonwalk. It was a little different from the boomers' moonwalk, but it did impact them as well. So much more kind of cultural fun stuff. But now we've got this other generation coming along, the Gen Y, the Gen Z, and their whole experience in media is very different. There is so much more information out there. The internet's come along, cable TV's coming along, there's information everywhere, and the message has changed. We went from man has conquered space to the universe is out to get you. The universe will kill you. The air is poisonous. The water is toxic. The grass causes allergies. Don't go out in the sun. The sun's going to kill you. And honestly, look back in your own life and ask yourself, how many of you laid out in the backyard with baby oil to get that tan? You're going to die. I mean, this generation is aware that the universe is trying to kill them. And so it's a very anxious generation. In fact, we have the highest levels of anxiety we have ever had among the young people that we have right now. So with all this said, if you look at some of the trends that happened, that shaped us, let's look at how they affected each generation. So like our matures, World War II, Great Depression, they actually started the civil rights movement more than anybody else. They don't get credit for that, but they kind of started that process. Movies, so we have started to have these shared media experiences. This is a very patriotic group. This is a group that was able to work within a system. They were happy to have a job, very conservative. Boomers came along and had a different experience. So they had Vietnam, they had Watergate. And so there was a lot less trust of the authority figures, much more questioning and pushing back with, should we follow our leaders? The civil rights movement of the matures led to the women's movement in particular, along with the civil rights movement that continued on the baby boomers. But with that, more women entered the workforce than ever before at levels where they hadn't been in the past. And so we started to see a higher divorce rate than we'd had in the past, because women were much more economically independent than they've been in the past. And by the way, television came along too. So even more shared media experiences that's bringing everybody together to have common experiences, common knowledge, common perceptions. Gen X comes along, and you're going to start to see how each generation affects the next generation. So Gen X, the Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall fell. We start to think, the world's not that dangerous. This is much ado about nothing. Life is pretty good. This is also the generation of latchkey kids, though. So where the baby boomers had this financial independence for women, higher divorce rates, that Gen X was much more likely to come home to a single parent household than ever before, much more likely to come home to an empty household because they had a working single parent. So it was a very independent generation, very self-reliant generation, slightly cynical generation. And this is also when PC gaming got started. So it's gotten better through the years, but Gen X really launched that trend. Now Gen Y came along. Well, this is where it got really scary. So the war came to our soil. They lived through September 11th. They don't remember a world pre-September 11th. There were school shootings. So you're not even safe in your own school. You're not so worried about the spooky person overseas trying to get you as you are the kid next door that may shoot you any minute. They also had the helicopter parents. And I do want to point out that they didn't invent the helicopter parents. It was done unto them. So if you look at our Gen X people, that were the latchkey kids. They looked at their parents and said, you know what? I really want to work like you did. I want to have financial independence like you did. And I also want to have a family that's intact, that we got the parents, the children all together. I want that traditional family and I want the finance. I want it all. And so what happened was we saw lower birth rates than in the past. We saw people not only delaying having children, having fewer children, and we also saw lower fertility rates. And so as people waited to have children, it was harder and harder for them to have children. So by the time they had children, and they may have only had one child, that was the baby. This child came into the world and it was like Lion King. It was like, here's the baby and nothing bad's gonna happen to him ever. And they got really involved in these children's lives. They'd already established their career, so they had the time to do it. And because they had this sense of, I'm going to be much more engaged as a family, they were engaged. So a lot of you in career services and recruiting may have experienced the helicopter parents. They're so much fun. Some of you may be helicopter parents, and we love you, and you love your children, and that's fine. But know that they're not the helicopter parents. It was done unto them. Also, the internet. Internet changed everything in terms of availability of information. And we talked about anxiety. We'll talk more about it later. Then we have Gen Z. So now we've got enemies that we're not even sure where they are or who they are or exactly why they hate us. We just know somebody wants to kill us for some reason. This generation grew up first through the Great Recession. Now they got the pandemic. They have never been stable. They've never known normal. They've never been safe, ever. And that's their normal existence. That's how they go through life. Privacy means something very different from them than what it does to other people. It's funny, they will put all of their problems out on the internet because you use crowdsourcing to solve a problem. And by the way, they'll put your company's problems on the internet too. We can come back to that. But other things freak them out. So like a lot of times I like to scare my students by talking about when I was a kid. I'm like, you know, when I was in college, they didn't have this online portal to look up your grades. The professor would have to post your grade outside of their door and you'd have to walk over to their office and look at the list on the door. But to protect your privacy, they would never put your name next to your grade. That would be horrible. They'd put your social security number and every student goes, because they know that's very private. I'm like, yeah, but in those days, the worst you could do is get a job using my social and pay into it. So it was all cool. They're so protective over that social. I've had kids call me and say, you know, I got a job offer from a company and everything seemed legit. Now they're telling me I can't work there unless I give them my social security number and my home address, my bank account number. And I'm like, yeah, that's actually okay. That's what it's there for. You can go ahead and do that. And then the other thing, of course, is mobile Wi-Fi. If you really want to watch someone in Gen Z freak out, tell them there's no Wi-Fi where you're going. Their head will explode. So let's look at how that impacts how they take instructions, because it's a little different by generation, and we forget that when we're managing them. So starting with the matures, they're easy. Put the part in the box, seal it with this tape so we can ship it. Got it. They have a job. They're happy. You pay me, I do my work, life is good. Now the boomers came along. They're like, you can be nice about it. They remember they were a little more questioning of authority. Ask nicely. When you get a chance, could you see if we have some of this tape and seal it up so we can ship it, please? Now, they know that was an order, but they appreciate you asking nicely, so they'll say, yeah, no problem, I'll do that today. Now, Gen X came along. Gen X was the first generation that was not guaranteed to have a higher standard of living than their parents' generation. That had always been an assumption that we could safely make until Gen X, and they were accused of a lot of bad things as a result, but they also were a little cynical, a little fussy, and so they still want you to ask nicely when you get a chance. Could you see if we have some Y tape sealed up so we can ship it? And they'll think, you know, I have an MBA. Can't we outsource this stuff? I mean, I'll do it now so I get back to my real work. So they were more educated than previous generations. They were the first generation to be underemployed after they graduated. They were the first generation to start to have to move back home after they graduated. And so little resentment, but they didn't always show it. They just say, yeah, sure thing. Gen Y came along. You've seen this. It all got different, right? So they want you to tell them what you want. This is a generation that grew up with the helicopter parents. Tell me what you want. I'll do it. I want to make you happy. Gen Y wants you to be happy with their work. Tell them what you want. They'll do it. put this part in that box and seal it with this tape so we can ship it by noon. Thank you. And what they'll think is, that's so easy. It's not until noon I can start looking for the tape at 11:45. This is not a generation that looks busy for the sake of it. They're going to do their work. They're going to do it well. They're not going to do that whole worry about the optics, look busy, your boss there's there, so you should type and look busy. They don't do that. About all they may say is, yeah, where do you keep the tape? Gen Z gets even more fun. So this is a generation that's lived on the internet their whole lives. They came into the world interacting with the internet before they could interact with people, and it's completely changed how they communicate. And they're going to be more like, I need your help shipping this part by noon. So we've got a hard deadline. We use this tape in those boxes. Try it once and let me know later if you have ideas on the process. It's very important that you let them know the limits, because they don't see limits unless they're made explicit, and that you let them understand there'll be the opportunity to get feedback later, because they have to do it your way first. Otherwise, this generation is so good at optimizing. They are the most efficient generation, and they will shortcut the heck out of whatever you give them unless you specifically tell them not to. And here's the best part. When you give them the instruction, they may not respond at all. Yeah, I wish I could see like how many of you this has happened to, but I can't see your faces right now. But I bet it has. Here's why. Here's what they're thinking. There's not an app for that. Why aren't the boxes self-sealing? I mean, if somebody's not making those, I'm going to patent the idea and start a company. In fact, I think I'm going to research that now. Very entrepreneurial generation. And here's the other thing. They have, actually, let me see if I can stop share, because I'm going to have to figure out where y'all are right now. All right. So y'all have the reaction buttons at the bottom of the screen. If you look at the very bottom, like mouse down towards the bottom, there's like a little smiley face with a plus. If any of you have a Snapchat account right now that you actively use, can you give me like a thumbs up or a clap or something so I can see who it is? Okay, good. All right. If you would be willing to interact with me to talk a little about Snapchat, because you see just a few of you, the rest of you go, what is she talking about and why did she change languages? If you'd be willing to share your Snapchat experience and interact with me, give me another thumbs up and I'm gonna unmute you. Oh, now you all got scared. All right, yay, Erin. Okay, Erin, let me see, I think I'm unmuting you. There you go. Hey, Erin, how you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
Who do you work with?
I work for Stevens College.
Oh, hi, wonderful. Okay, so Erin, who do you snap with? And don't worry, I will interpret this for everybody in a minute.
No problem. So I snap with old coworkers. I moved from Seattle back to Columbia, where I'm originally from, and that's how I keep up with them, their pets, their lives. It's just an easy way for us to communicate with quick chat or photos.
And so your coworkers, what generations do you think you and your coworkers might be in?
We're millennials.
Just millennials, okay.
Yeah.
The millennials are very much in Snapchat. The older millennials, there's probably some older millennials on the call. Why would I do that? Okay, so what's your longest streak right now, Erin?
Probably 3 months.
3 months. Okay, awesome. All right, so let me kind of chime in and interpret for everybody else real quickly. So Snapchat, and Erin, you can correct me when I'm wrong, because I don't snap because my children won't let me. But Snapchat, it's a way to share pictures and information with other people. And so if I were to snap with Erin today, you know, I can send her a snap, she'd snap back, great, now we've snapped. If I do it again tomorrow, it says, ooh, you did it 2 days in a row. If we do it again the next day, it's like, you've done it 3 days in a row. Now we've started a streak, and you snap every day to make sure you keep the streak going. For our young people, these streaks become incredibly important, because if you break a streak, it means you don't care about the relationship, and you can lose friendships. I had a student whose girlfriend broke up with him because he couldn't maintain a snap streak, and she said, if you can't even commit to a snap streak, how can I count on you to commit to me? So this is where we are right now, and where it's affected them is, and Erin, I'm going to mute you again to take the pressure off. Thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely.
But where it's happened is now I've got all these snaps I have to deal with every single day. You got to do it every day. And I've got texts coming in because they're all over GroupMe. And I've got other various social media things happening. I've got life going on. And there's so much noise that requires my attention. As a result, and yes, to the question, the messages do typically disappear after 24 hours. There's so much noise. And as a result, if what you've sent me does not require a response, the most polite thing I can do is not respond to you. So when a young person doesn't respond to you, that's their way of being respectful to you, which is weird for us old people, right? And the funny thing is, all you have to do is tell them, I know it's going to sound crazy, but if I send you an email and ask you to do something, could you email me back and tell me that you're on it and when you're going to get it done? And they'll probably look at you like you're crazy and go, all right. I mean, they follow directions just fine, but it's not because they're rude. It's not because they're ignorant. It's just a different world that they live in. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my screen again, because the thing that you're really wondering about in all of this is, what is the matter with these kids nowadays? And some of you may remember this movie, and to help, I'm not a singer and I keep singing when I present. It's just my way of pretending I can sing. What's the matter with kids today? It's a whole movie, Bye Bye Birdie. And there's a whole song in it that hopefully you recognize now about what's wrong with kids. They're entitled, they have horrible music, they're rude, they don't care about their parents, they don't have any respect, they don't work. And they were talking about the baby boomers. So this is a trend we've had in Gen X. I know you love to pick on the baby boomers, so you should know they did the same thing with you. They had whole movies about what a mess Gen X was. Every generation has been accused of being entitled, of being lazy, of being the generation that's going to ruin the next generation. And the truth is, every generation adapts to the world that it's in, and they carry us into the future. And often the things that we accuse our young people of, we're no better. I was in an airport about a year ago in the Netherlands, and I saw this. So we've got this grandfather and the baby. Grandfather's clearly been made responsible for watching the baby, and they're both on their phones watching movies and just hanging out. This is not like the young people are glued to their devices, like, oh, you see these kids are just walking, watching their phones. No, this is all of us. This is all of us. And a lot of people like to quote this study, and by the way, I have to report it was a very flawed study, but there was a study saying the average attention span of people is 8 seconds. This study was not on young people. It was across all ages in the US. This is a cultural phenomenon that we have a shorter attention span than we used to. So for everyone, we're going to have to get better at keeping their attention. But the young people have always lived like this, and they're better at adapting to it and better at figuring out, how do I make things interesting and engaging? So let's talk about some of the other misconceptions and reframe them so that hopefully we can bring a little love back to our young people. So the first one is, you see your baby with the iPad. These kids came into the world, they landed on an iPad, and it was good. And they could interact with the iPad before they could interact with people. They could make the iPad communicate with them before they could communicate to a person. Did that impact their communication skills? Heck yeah. Communication goes through the device to another. Everything through the device, then to another. It's not wrong. It is different. And so, for example, I have all the kids on the computer. Play is very different. And people say, oh, these kids are playing all these video games. What's wrong with them? And I struggle with that too. I'm not a video gamer myself. But here's what I've noticed. When the kids get on the game and they put on the headphones, they interact, they talk, they share their lives, they play. They're also using critical thinking and strategy and teamwork to solve problems together. These interactive online games, in many ways, are better forms of play than just, honestly, when we were kids, we just sit around and get in trouble. This is a different form of play where we go through the device to connect with one another. And then, by the way, I'm going to come back to the trophy guy. And then we have the selfie generation. Oh, they're so narcissistic. They're so self-absorbed, always taking pictures of themselves. Okay, let's reframe this a little bit. When you were young, I want you to think back, and we'll be able to figure out how big your town was by when I hit the point that resonates with you. When you were a teenager, you may have gone to the mall and hung out with your friends at the mall, or smaller town. You may have cruised the Sonic. You may have driven up and down the strip and had that one drive-in restaurant where everybody would stop to hang out with each other. Or You may, like really small town like me, have had this place out on the levee where the farmer never knew we were, and somebody get a keg, you'd be out on the levee, and as soon as somebody said, hey guys, watch this, the party got started, and then you knew it was gonna be fun. Here's the thing, in all of those situations, young people are coming together and they're interacting and they're gauging people's reactions to their behaviors. And that experience of I'm gonna say or do something and I'm gonna check your reaction to it to start to decide who I am and who I want to be, this is normal. This means you're not a sociopath, that you want to fit in with society. This is normal. This generation does it through the device. I have an experience, I take a picture, I post it online, people react. I have another experience, I take a picture, I post it online, people react. I see the reactions. From those reactions, I start to change my view of myself and others. Now there's good and there's bad in this, and some of you are probably seeing at least one of them right now. The good news is, when we were growing up, our friend group probably was all very much like us, from the same town, same background, same experiences, and so they tended to confirm what we already believed and what we already knew. This generation is the most diverse generation ever, and their friend group is the most diverse friend group that you would have ever seen in young people. And because of that, the reactions they get come from a very diverse population. So their worldview is so much broader, and their ability to adapt to the world is so much better. On the downside, you get things like trolling and people that are just cruel and nasty in their feedback. So we also are seeing higher rates of depression than we've ever seen in any other generation. And they are starting to do research tying a lot of this depression back to the experience that they're having with negative feedback in social media. So there's good and there's bad, but this selfie experience doesn't mean they're narcissists. It means they're normal. And then to the far, I don't know if it's right or left for you. I can't do my sense of direction in Zoom, but we got the kiddo all bundled up. We make fun of them, right? You're like, when I was a kid, we didn't have seatbelt laws. No, you roll around in the way back of the station wagon, and you got really bored. You put a sign in the back window that says, help, I'm being kidnapped, and nobody called CPS. No, they'd honk and wave and keep driving on by. Then you go to the playground, you know these nasty plastic, no, you had the 20-foot high metal slide that would scald you with third-degree burns on the way down the slide, and we liked it. And we act like these were the good old days, and this is how it should be. So yeah, this generation, we've gotten very concerned about safety, and we did it for Gen Y as well. Thank you, helicopter parents, you did some good things. And here's what resulted from that. Not only did we have a lot fewer stupid injuries, I mean, that was like the big joke when I was a kid, you better not break your arm, because you break your arm, I'll be so mad, I'm gonna give you a whipping. We have way fewer injuries. But more importantly, this is a generation that's very conscious of making good, safe choices. So we had lower rates of tobacco use than ever before, and juuling is a whole different issue. We can get to that later if there's time. Lower rates of underage drinking than ever before, lower rates of drug abuse than ever before, and you're like, but there's an opioid crisis. Opioids are an old people drug. Young people are not doing drugs like they used to. Lower rates of teen pregnancy than ever before. They're making better, safer choices. Now, the other rumor that we hear is everybody gets a trophy, and we did go through a phase with that. This little guy in the picture here, he won $3 million for playing Fortnite, the video game, when he was, I want to say 16 years old. $3 million, which really made me kind of go to my kid and go, yeah, you can play Fortnite, it's cool. But here's the thing, everybody doesn't get a trophy, and you're probably seeing this if you're at a university already. This is the most competitive generation we've ever had. Everything is a competition. You can't just enjoy anything. It's so competitive. Like band used to be mostly about the bus ride to the football game so you can hang out with your friends. Now, you compete all year long. You don't just play an instrument, you dance while you play the instrument. You've got on season, off season, first, second, third band. If you're not in first band, you're never gonna amount to anything. My favorite is we got these kids doing triathlons. When I was a kid, a three-legged race meant you tied one of your legs to your friend's leg and you tried to limp across the finish line. No, these kids have $2,000 bikes and they're competitive in triathlon. Cheerleading. Cheer is a competitive sport now. It's not just about supporting the football team. These ladies are competitive, ladies and gentlemen. It's co-ed now. Who cheers for the cheerleaders? I really think the football team should be required to come out and cheer for them, but that's just me. Everything is a competition. And and you've seen it in admissions. So like Harvard, if you were a boomer and you wanted to go to Harvard, you had about a 22% chance of getting in, which is still tough. If you were Gen X, it had dropped down to 18%. By the time Gen Y came along, it was down to about 7%. For Gen Z, we're down in the 4s. And you're thinking, yeah, that's Harvard. But even the state schools, and I just picked a sampling, you know the story. You all know that baby that was born into the family where everyone went to State U and they put the State U onesie on them when they were born. They took them all to State U games and everybody's like, State U, teach them the song. The kid made great grades. They were involved in leadership, lots of extracurriculars, and they didn't get into State U. This is what's happening. And this is reality for these kids. When my daughter was, and this is a story a lot of you can identify with, my daughter was in middle school, like so many middle school kids, she goes, I want to be a veterinarian when I grow up. And because her mother's not normal, I made her do an informational interview with a veterinarian to find out what does that really involve. And so she went to the meeting and he said, well, in order to do that, you have to graduate from a top vet school. To get into a top vet school, you have to graduate at the very top of your class in a strong science program. To get into a strong science program, you have to graduate in the very top of your high school graduation class with lots of extracurriculars and leadership. In order to graduate at the top of your high school class, you have to take every single AP class available because they have weighted averages for the GPA. So the more AP classes you can get, the higher your GPA. In order to have access to all of the AP classes in order to bump your GPA, you have to be in the advanced math track when you're in middle school. But in order to get into the advanced math track in middle school, you have to take a placement test in 5th grade that puts you on the advanced math track. But in order to get invited to take the 5th grade advanced math placement test, you have to make a certain score on your 3rd grade standardized math test. So the likelihood of you being a vet is determined by your 3rd grade standardized test. This is the world they've always lived in. It's the world that they know. And it's the world they've had to deal with. And as a result, we have the most educated and indebted, they're so deeply in debt, generation we've ever had, and the most entrepreneurial. You know, when I last checked with them, about 2/3 of them plan to have a second income stream while they have a job. They don't bank on their company to take care of them. They expect to have a second income stream because they need the money. And having grown up in the Great Recession, they don't know if you're going to take care of them. So know that they'll be having a second job. Don't freak out about it. And have you have a second job too, most likely. This is the new economy. It's what they're expecting. And also their role models are different. Being an entrepreneur looks different than it used to. They are seeing people in their teens making millions and millions of dollars. Some of these people you've heard of, some of them you haven't. I'm not going to go through all of them just in the interest of time. But I will tell you my very favorite, the guy at the bottom, Sean Belnick. And by the way, I love Lily Singh. If you've not watched her YouTube videos, you must. But Sean Belnick, he had a whole bunch of those little trading cards that the boys have, and I guess the girls too, like the Yu-Gi-Oh! And the Naruto and all that stuff. And his mom basically said, get rid of the cards. So he built a website to help him sell these cards on the internet. Well, a company saw how well he built his website and they bought it from him for $30 million when he was 19 years old. And it became bizchair.com, which of course made me go into my high school age son at the time and say, you know, honey, I bought you these Naruto cards. What kind of investment return are we going to get on these suckers? But these kids are realizing anybody can be successful because in the old model, you needed to have a really good network and you had to go to a bank and get a loan. And now, no credit, no problem. You can start a business and fail it every week and the banks will never even know. And you don't need to hire the expertise. You've got the best supply chain at your fingertips. You've got the best marketing tools at your fingertips. Everything you need to start a business is right there. So then if they're going to work for you, how do you make that work, right? Okay, so there's 3 things we need to think about with our Gen Z kiddos. There's purpose, there's people, there's passion. Now the purpose part, you need to make time, put aside time to mentor these kids and explain why they're doing what they're doing. They will fill in the gaps. They're used to working on their own. Where Gen Y had the helicopter parents, Gen Z was handed an iPad and sent off in a corner. They are very accustomed to not asking anyone permission, forgiveness, anything. They just go with it, draw their own conclusions. They don't ask for help, even if you want them to. They think they're fine. So you need to be real clear with them. So for instance, I had a student, right? What happens in this presentation stays in this presentation, right? Okay. So I had this student that we sent him out on an internship. Smart kid, really good kid. And as often happens, the first week he was on the internship, he came to his manager and said, "Hey, I finished the project you gave me for the summer." And the manager said, "What do you mean? That was a 12-week project. What do you mean you finished?" He goes, "Well, I created a spreadsheet and I threw in some automation for it. And so now there's a dashboard, and everything you ask, you just push a button and it'll give you the numbers and it'll update them. And so you don't have to run all those reports individually. It's all dynamic and ready to go. I can put it on the web so anybody can access it from their desktop. What else do you want me to do?" And the manager's like, "Well, why don't you look around and see if you can find something else to do for your next project?" And the student's like, "Okay." Now, he looked around and his coworkers all looked really busy and he didn't want to bother them. So instead, he decided, "I know, I'll call our clients and see how we might be able to help them." So he called the clients, specifically the highest executive he could find. They work with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. He tended to call the owner because, you might as well ask the person that can do something about it and say, "Hey, what else could our company be doing for you? Do you understand what we do with your money? Would you like more information on how we handle your money? You would? Okay." So then he calls Goldman Sachs in New York and says, "Hey, would you be willing to fly down to Houston and put on a training for a bunch of CEOs and mid-sized businesses on what we're doing with their money right now?" They're like, "No problem, we'll send you a contract." Then he calls the Hilton and says, "Hey, I need to get a ballroom so we can have this big conference with Goldman and a bunch of," and they're like, "No problem, we'll send you a contract." The manager found out when he was presented with the two contracts. The manager was furious. Of course, he called me and yelled at me because, that's what they do. And he said, "What's wrong with your student?" I'm like, "Well, it sounds like you got one of the good ones. I mean, he found something to do after you told him to." He said, "Well, he shouldn't have done that." "Well, did you tell him he couldn't call the clients?" "Well, he should have known." "Well, apparently you didn't." And here's the thing, if you're not clear on your limits with them, they don't see limits. You find your own solution. We're all equal on the internet. I can find my own answers anywhere I want to. I'm not going to come to you unless you tell me I have to come to you first. Be very clear on limits with this generation and enjoy their initiative. It's good. Here's the other thing. They really do care about other people. Even though they go through the device, they are incredibly social. This generation is actually bringing back bricks and mortar because they physically like to gather. They may physically gather and be on their phones interacting with each other in person. That's perfectly normal. It's not rude. I was at a fundraiser and there was a girl who was out on the dance floor and she was dancing and she had her cell phone on and she's facing her cell phone and she's dancing around. And somebody said, "How self-absorbed can you be to take a video of yourself dancing?" And I said, "Look again." She was FaceTiming with a friend who wasn't able to come to the event. And it was her way to dance with her friend, even though her friend couldn't be there. This is a very, very inclusive generation. And you saw it in the pandemic. Things like, the socially distanced proms or this Teens for Help thing. That was actually an initiative of some high schoolers around my part of town that for free to anyone that felt uncomfortable going to the grocery store, you could go to their website. They would do all your grocery shopping for you. Bring it to your house, drop it at your doorstep, take money, Venmo. You didn't have to go through any kind of approval process or anything. If you asked for help, they would give it. They charged nothing. Graduations. So we've got the socially distanced graduation, but what's even more interesting is you've got these kids socially distanced out on the field. And if you look closely, about 2/3 of them are kneeling when we have the presentation of the flag and it's a diverse group of kids that are kneeling. This is a group that's very much about how can we support each other. And with everything going on right now with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and this growing awareness and movement within our country, it was really all started by a 17-year-old girl. Daniela Fraser, who's pictured here, she was the girl who took the video that made everybody aware of what happened to George Floyd. And it traumatized her. It absolutely traumatized her. But it was her strength and her foresight that really made a difference. This is a generation that cares about people. The other thing, when you look at people, is we've got a lot of companies that have affinity groups. And they're like, oh, we have an affinity group for this and an affinity group for that. But this generation is very aware if the affinity group is really just a safe place for people to go because they're not safe anywhere else in the organization. They are very tapped into hypocrisy. For them, if you're not truly inclusive, they will spot it a mile away. And you have to celebrate the whole person as they are. We celebrate mental health. That means if someone says, I need a day for my own head, give them the day for their own head. I gave my team 2 days of healing the other day. I'm like, we need to heal. Take 2 days. If you want to work, work. If you want to take a break, heal. This is a group that recognizes that we are whole people even at work, and they want you to be open to radical change. How they look at diversity is very different because it's such a diverse generation, because they've gotten such diverse feedback in their worldview. And where previous generations were given the message that this is diversity. We may look different on the outside, but we're all the same on the inside. And that's what matters. And this generation went, no. We are all totally different, inside and out. Every single person is different and it's awesome. And if I can't figure out how you're different right away, I'm going to spend time until I figure out how you're different. Because once I find the different, then you're interesting to me. They are craving the difference. They're craving the uniqueness of each individual. And when they see companies that try to make everybody alike, they can't wrap their heads around it. It just doesn't make sense to them. And again, when you look at work policies, they will question them. And so if you've got a policy that's not utterly inclusive, you're going to need to have a reason for it. This one's always my dramas. If we have time, remind me of a story for this one. And they find creative ways to overcome to still be inclusive. I mean, with everything going on, with kids being stuck inside, we've got lawn signs celebrating graduation. Kids are still getting together and they're wearing their masks and they're cleaning up because by God, they're going to connect. And actually, one of my favorite corporate things I saw was if you look on the Chick-fil-A there, it's kind of hard to see, but they have signs up on the drive-through as you're coming up of all of their seniors that are working there who are graduating, celebrating those seniors, because they couldn't necessarily have the party, they couldn't necessarily have the public celebration. And so the company found a way to celebrate these young people in the best way that they could. These little things are what's important. Celebrating each individual where they are with whatever you can. And if you have to be creative and do it differently, all the better. And they're really good at finding creative ways to do it. And then there's passion. And passion so often gets misunderstood. These kids are so passionate, like so many young people. And the best way I can describe it is, if you've ever seen that dog that is just determined to chase cars, and it scares you to death because you don't want the dog to get hit by the car, right? And so what we do is we put the dog in a fence or we tie him up so they can't kill themselves. And it does protect the dog. And slowly but surely the dog loses her passion for cars. Now, losing a passion for cars is one thing. Our young people, when we put them out in the workforce, they have this level of passion for their career to the point that they can be a danger to themselves, not because they're self-centered or rotten. They're excited. When they come in and they're like, what's it going to take for me to be CEO one day? That doesn't mean that they're entitled. It means they've got a vision that maybe I could do this. And I promise you, if you want to choose between two employees and one employee says, I want to stay in the job that I'm in for the rest of my life, or the one that says, I want to be CEO one day, hire the one that wants to be CEO one day. And then you need to harness that passion so they don't hurt themselves. You need to harness it. So there's two questions you need to ask a young person anytime you give them something new. And if you ask these two questions, everything gets easier. The first is, what is your understanding of this task? Young people will consistently tell you they know how to do whatever you're asking them to do, which means I can figure it out because they're used to figuring things out themselves. Their whole lives, they've gone on YouTube to figure out how to do whatever they want to do. They've never really paid attention in school. They kind of go to school to socialize with their friends. They go home, they reteach themselves online, take their tests, they do fine. They're used to finding their own answers, so they assume they can do it. Best example, I had a student who rose up very quickly within an oil and gas company right after he graduated. And I was so proud of him. I'm like, Jamal, what did you do that you've been so successful? And he said, okay, so when I started there, I was working a little bit and they said, hey, do you know this new accounting principle that just came out? And I said, yes. And they said, could you lead our efforts in that area this week and going forward? I'm like, yes. So I went home and I YouTubed and I Googled and I taught myself the new principle. And the next day I was in charge of it. And after I'd been in charge of it for a while, they came to me and they said, hey, do you know how this accounting principle affects Europe and Asia? And I said, yes. And they said, okay, well, could you start leading that as of tomorrow? He's like, uh-huh. So I went home and I Googled and I YouTubed and I taught it to myself. And now I'm in charge of the world. Now it worked out for Jamal because he's a bright kid. But I tell you what, if his manager had known that Jamal didn't actually know how to do all of this, my guess is the manager would have spent some time encouraging him to get some formal training and even some certifications. They are very enthusiastic. They are very confident in their ability to find the answers and self-teach. So ask them, what's your understanding of this task? And the other question you want to ask is, how could we do this better? And we forget to ask our young people this. But the thing is, these guys are hardwired for efficiency. Hardwired. Like my student whose internship, he finished a 12-week internship in 1 week. I see that all the time. But if we don't ask them how we could do it better, two things happen. One, we never find out how we could do it better. Two, they sometimes make decisions on their own without telling us what they're doing. Neither of which is good. But if you ask them, how do you think we could do this better? They'll give you feedback, which opens a dialogue that you're part of, which is good. So always ask those two questions. Here's the thing. Overall communication is evolving and it's happening quickly. So just between 2011 and 2018, 13,000 survey responses that I did, you can see that there were some systems that weren't even on the radar of my young people 7 years prior. So in 2011, GroupMe, Snapchat, Instagram, LinkedIn, they really weren't even part of their daily lives. But by 2018, it was huge with them. It was like a big thing. And the other thing that happened, if you look like Facebook, Facebook is for old people. The young people only have Facebook accounts to make sure their parents don't post anything they don't approve of. But other than that, they've all moved off and they've moved over to Snapchat. It's moving quickly and you can't possibly keep up with it. So I wish I could see y'all and the screen at the same time, but I can't. So we're going to have to go back and forth, I think. I'm going to show you an ad that Aldi did. And I want you to look at the ad and see if you get the joke. Okay, actually, I'm gonna, just for fun, whoops. I'm gonna go back. All right, if you recognize it, let me see a thumbs up. If you got the joke, let me see a thumbs up. Okay, a few people getting the joke. Okay, so got a handful of folks getting the jokes. Let me go back to it. Let me give you a hint. Should have warned y'all about my singing. Whoa, we're halfway there. Whoa, living on a pear. Get it now? Bon Jovi, 1999? Woohoo! Okay, now we have a lot of folks that lived through 1999 on this Zoom call right now, am I right? But we only had a small group of you that got the joke right away. And my guess is if we were a bunch of people our age, in the ad campaign meeting, we'd say, like, I didn't get the joke. Like, that's totally my generation, and I still didn't get the joke. Here's the thing. This ad isn't targeting people that lived through 1999. It's targeting the people that came after. Kind of like my Friends background right now. The young people are more familiar with Friends than the generation that grew up with them the first time did because they're so immersed in it. Back when this ad came out, Living on a Prayer was the top meme spoof going on the internet at the time. Whoa, lizard on a chair. Whoa, dog elected mayor. Whoa, kitten on a stair. You know, it just keeps going and going and going. Everywhere they turn, they were living on a prayer memes. And unless you're living in this, you never keep up with it. Unless you're living in it, you can't really connect the way they can. And so the best thing you can do is to have them around you so that they can serve as interpreters and to kind of give you the information that you need to be able to communicate with the next generation. Because the thing is, they are hardwired for where we're going. We're hardwired for where we've been. They're going into the future, we're following them now. We have to learn from them, which is a new experience for those of us who've been around for a while. And I'm not saying they can't learn from us. They definitely still can, but it is a two-way street. So I'm going to give y'all just a few other things. I have not released my spring survey yet because I got buried in quarantine, but I'm going to give you a few tidbits just from spring that are preliminary. They could change. 69% consider their parents friends. 58% want their managers to be personal friends. The top 5 preferred ways of learning about companies: school recruiting system, career fairs, classroom presentations, student organization presentations, and company website. I'd like to point out that most 3 of those 5 are in-person, face-to-face. For presentations, 68% still like in-person presentations. Only 10% like live streaming, where they have to be in a certain place at a certain time. And 24% would, if you're going to have to go online, make it pre-recorded so I can do it at my convenience. And I noticed the first question we got when we sat down to do this presentation is, are you going to record it? So it's not just them. They are leading us into the future. 62% of those eligible to vote say that they vote. I didn't check voting records, but that's what they say. And their number one way of getting news is traditional television news outlets. And I should clarify, that means that if it comes from a traditional television news outlet and they see it in their media feed, they believe it. But Snapchat is the second most common source of news. And when I did a focus group and I asked them, how do you separate real news from fake news? They said the things that are said most frequently by the most people are probably what's true. So let that little thought sink into your head. If you want to get the surveys, you can text the word difference to 33777. I do not sell, I do not market, but what was happening when I would do these presentations is I would have 30 people email me and say, can you send me these things? And that's just a pain. This makes it happen automatically. It'll send you the survey results from fall 19. I ask different questions each time. And then when I do the spring survey results, God willing, it'll send that to you automatically, hopefully in the next few weeks if I have a good week. So with that, what questions do we have? Wow, all sorts of stuff going on. What kind of questions do we have? Or flashbacks? I bet we had a lot of flashbacks.
Well, Jamie, this is Heather. That was awesome. And I just looked down and it was honestly the fastest 50 minutes that I've spent in a long time. It was awesome. I didn't realize how quickly the time was going. So yeah, folks, if you have questions, you can certainly come on mute. If it's easier, just put it into chat with the last few minutes that we have with Jamie here.
If there's no questions, I'll go back and tell you that story about policies that I didn't tell you earlier because I wasn't sure if we'd had time.
Yes, do that, Jamie, while people are typing in any questions.
Okay, so I did have a young person that was working for me, and he was a challenge, but he was a good kid, but he was a challenge. And he didn't like the dress code, and our office does have a dress code. And he came to work one day, and he was wearing a BVT t-shirt, a hoodie, baggy jeans with big rips in the knees, and like open sneakers. And I saw him coming down the hall, and I looked at him, and I said, Kenneth, walk me through your decision-making process this morning when you got dressed. And that's kind of how I always kind of start the thing. It's like, walk me through your decision-making process. And he said, yeah, this is what I felt like wearing. I said, you know, it's not dress code, right? He said, yeah. I said, so tell me about your choices. And he said, I don't believe in the dress code. I feel like I can be just as professional in this outfit as I can if I'm dressed up. And I needed to prove that, so I'm not going to dress up. I said, okay, I hear you. I'm curious, Kenneth, have you ever seen me wear pantyhose? And he said, no. I said, well, when I was your age, they made me wear a skirt, pantyhose, and heels every day to work. I despised it. But I don't do that anymore. What do you think happened? And he said, you fought back, didn't you? I said, no, I got promoted. And when I got promoted, I changed the rules and nobody ever had to wear that stuff ever again. And he said, well, that sounds like a good approach too. I said, and here's the other thing. The work that we do, we have young people coming in for interviews every day wearing suits. And do you think they're nervous and scared? He said, yeah. I said, do you think they're uncomfortable in a suit? He said, yeah. I said, so if you're nervous and uncomfortable in a suit, and the people around you are dressed in jeans and t-shirts, will that make you more comfortable or less comfortable? He said, it'd make them less comfortable. So, well, how do you want our students to feel? They said, I hadn't thought about that. And we never had a problem again. He dressed up from then on. So if they understand the why behind your policies, they're very supportive, but you do have to explain it sometimes. Yeah, I'm glad I don't have to wear pantyhose anymore too.
Jamie, there's a question here. I'm going to scroll up here. It says, how do we communicate with young people who say they don't answer the phone unless it's their mom and don't check email? They want to be texted or contacted in person. Not realistic for student contacts. Any advice?
It depends on the authority you have, because you can't tell them this is the rule, you have to do it. If you have authority over them, you can say this is just a rule, you have to do it this way. Otherwise, you're going to have to adapt to them if you have no control. And most of them are finding preferred text. But I'll tell you how bad it is. I had one kiddo that was interning, and I said, how's it going? He said, it was really overwhelming at first with all the email, but now I've got a system and it works. I'm like, oh, I'd love to know your system. What do you do? He said, I just don't read email anymore. I said, well, how do you know if your manager needs you to do something? It's like, they'll text me. I said, so you gave your cell phone number to everyone you work with and they're all texting you if they need something? He said, no. Everybody emails me except for my manager. She's the only one that has my text number. I'm like, but what if somebody else needs you to do something and you're not reading your email? He goes, well, then if it's important, they'll get annoyed. They'll tell my manager, she'll text me and then I'll do it. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know how effective that strategy is. But this was the mindset. So you may have to have a very frank conversation with them about expectations. And if you don't have that authority, you may have to adapt.
Thanks, Jamie. Another question. It says, about office hours. I've heard from employers who complain about our students who don't adhere to company office hours. Not just 15 minutes late, but come in 2 hours late. Wow.
Yeah. So there's two things going on with that. One is an individual issue, because that level of tardiness, that's just somebody that doesn't have a lot of time management skills. There is a generational thing in there too, that they don't quite understand why things have to be at a certain time, because in their world, when so much is digital and on demand, it's like, I could do this whenever I want to. Why does it have to be precisely right now? So I have found when I had tardiness issues, it was useful to explain the impact that it had on other people and how it caused pain and suffering for other people. And I would call the people by name, like so-and-so had to do this, so-and-so had to do this, so-and-so had to cover, so-and-so, was late for something. When they realize that their behavior hurts another person, they're more responsive than, because this is what you have to do.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Jamie. And with that, I don't see any more questions coming up in the chat, but we're just right at the hour. So I want to say thank you, Jamie, so much for an informative and fun conversation. And we look forward to learning more from your survey results and your next book, hopefully.
Awesome. Thank you. This was fun.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye, everyone.